Hi, let's talk about San Francisco. Let's start with weather, shall we? Just because I feel like that's the first thing anybody ever comments on when you tell somebody where you're from or where you're living. If nothing else, SF weather is like pretty damn consistent. It does vary where you are in the city, but a very classic SF day is a very foggy, overcast morning, usually like 55 degrees when you step out of your house. And then midday, it might peak around like 60 degrees. Maybe the sun will peek out, maybe it won't. And then back to foggy and colder in the evening, usually in the 50s. October is blazing though. Like it's a circus in October. The city is like alive. It'll be like beautiful 75 sunny the whole month. Just wonderful. Microclimates though do exist in the Bay Area. So if the SF fog, who we affectionately named Carl, is getting you down, like all it takes is a quick 15-minute BART ride over to Oakland, which typically is like anywhere between like 10 to 15 degrees warmer. Marin tends to be a lot warmer. If you head down to the peninsula, the South Bay, it's a lot warmer down there. So if weather is a huge impact on you, you might want to look at living in like an SF adjacent city. Ease of making friends. In SF, you don't quite have the Seattle freeze, if you've heard of that, but you also don't quite have the warmth of like some Midwestern cities. I will say because so many people live with roommates in SF, that alone gives people like a small little pod. Personally, within a year of living there, I had trouble finding people that I like truly clicked with, but I met a lot of people. So it wasn't for lack of trying. Like it wasn't necessarily hard for me to meet people, but I needed to live there for a couple more years to really find like a solid friend group. Walkability. One of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to SF. I will hype SF to no end when it comes to walkability. It's one of my favorite things about the city. People be walking in SF. The city itself is not actually that big. I want to say it's smaller than 10 square miles. It's very, very possible to walk across like 4 or 5 neighborhoods within the span of like 30-40 minutes. Like if you want to walk somewhere, you pretty much can. There's an elevation gain to be expected though. Some neighborhoods are flatter than others, especially if you live on the west half of the city, but you will be walking some hills as well, which lends to some nice views. So I never minded it personally. I liked it. In terms of like dominant transportation methods around the city, I would say there's a lot of folks taking Uber and Lyft. That has sort of taken over the city. There are a ton of bus lines. I took the bus every day to work. I took the bus to my therapist's office if I didn't walk. So like I was a huge Muni supporter. I'm big on like socialized anything, so no surprises there. And then in terms of cars, I personally had my car in the city, but I didn't use it every day. It's in no way essential. Probably half the people I knew did not have a car in the city, and it was not an issue because it is so walkable and everything is so close to each other. If you want to get out of the city, BART will take you some places, Caltrain will take you some places, but the Bay Area as a whole doesn't have the best connected public transit systems. It's kind of disjointed, so if you're looking to leave the city a ton, a car is probably helpful. Parks. Park culture is so real in San Francisco. Another one of the things I will just romanticize for eternity. Parks are a part of the fabric of life in SF. It's a very beautiful thing that, compared to a city like LA, where a lot of times you find yourself like shopping for leisure, on the weekends the parks are just flooded with people. They're drinking, they're doing other things besides drinking. You just cannot go more than a few blocks without finding some sort of green patch, which I really appreciate coming from LA before this, where parks were few and far between and people didn't really use them as a public utility, versus in SF they are very well loved. In terms of like a dominant job or industry, no surprises here. Tech is monolithic in SF, the Silicon Valley, the Bay Area in general. You already knew that. It's pervasive at this point. It hasn't always been like that in SF. Many would argue it's destroyed the fabric of the city, and it's true with so many just like oversized monopolistic corporations taking root in SF. Labor-wise, I would say most people I knew found their footing in tech, but that's also because I was in tech, so naturally that's what surrounded me. But I absolutely had friends working in healthcare and food services, fashion even. So if tech is not your jam, it is very possible to live in SF. It's just that you're going to have to be on board with people nonstop talking about tech and software as a service. If you like some fucking nerds, SF is your spot, I will say. Culture. That should be easy to condense into a 1-minute clip of this video. Clearly a lot of nuance here, but broad strokes. Historically, SF is a very artsy, alternative, bohemian, some would say hippie community. If you think of like Haight-Ashbury, absolutely have that presence in San Francisco, with a lot of transplants coming in for tech and not necessarily moving to San Francisco because they want to be in San Francisco, but just moving there because they have a job that plopped them there. You have a lot more like, you know, white fratty people living in the marina. You have a lot of like yuppie people living in Noe Valley or Pac Heights. Huge queer community, largely centered around the Castro. You have the Mission, which has always been occupied by a heavily Latinx community, now being very much gentrified. So it very much varies by neighborhood. Culture-wise, it is a true city in that way. This segues into gentrification. It would be very negligent to make a video about living in San Francisco and not mention the gentrification currently wreaking havoc on the city. I do recognize that as a white woman with some class privilege, I am not in the best position or the right position to be the one educating you about gentrification. I certainly have done my best to educate myself, but I'm going to link articles below about gentrification written by folks most impacted by it. That way, if you're considering moving to the city, you can be more conscious about how you're impacting the landscape of the city. And then that segues into housing. Pre-COVID, the rental market was super competitive. Things went extremely fast for very high rent. I'll talk more about cost of living later, but just to talk about functionally what the housing looks like, SF is very unique in that if you were blindfolded and just dropped in the center of the city not knowing where you were and then took your blindfold off, you would very quickly realize that you're in San Francisco because of the like Queen Anne, Victorian architecture. It's beautiful. I love just looking at homes in San Francisco. I think it has such like rich architectural history. It's just beautiful, and I was very excited to live in a historic home, not some, you know, some luxury generic condo. So you will find that a lot of folks are living in like older 1920s homes, like a 4 or 5 bedroom home with a bunch of roommates. There's so much character to people's apartments. Like, I find a lot of beauty in it. Like any city, you know, these huge luxury apartment buildings are going up, but I honestly did not even know a single soul living in one of those, but I know that people do for some reason. I have a whole video on my apartment hunt in SF if that's of any interest, where I show some of the apartments I toured, so I'll have that linked up here as well as down below. Food! SF does not get enough love as a foodie city. It will surprise you if you're not already aware. For me, the standouts are the bakeries, like some of the most amazing pastries you will ever have the delight to eat. Brunch game, very strong. I know brunch is a contentious topic right now, but I will say I think SF is one of the best breakfast and brunch food cities in the country. The ramen is super good if you go to Japantown. North Beach is an historic Italian neighborhood, so a lot of authentic Italian food if that's your jam. The Mission, like I said, historically Latinx, so they have really good like Mission style burritos that I very much miss and love. And then SF is one of the cities that has Michelin or the Michelin rated system, so if that's in your budget, there are some divine Michelin starred places. I never ran out of places I wanted to try. You so many options, so many authentic spots, like such an array of food. I lived super close to Chinatown, so a lot of amazing dim sum and xiaolongbao, matcha. I've never heard anybody shit on SF's food scene, so. Outdoorsiness. This is a category I care about because green space is super important to me and my mental health and my overall well-being. I would say there is like an outdoorsy scene in SF. Plenty of outdoorsy folks if that's your community, but it's like in no way Colorado level or Utah level. One of my roommates would go hiking with her boyfriend almost every single weekend, like multiple times a weekend, but your options within the city limits are limited. Like, you certainly have hills and large parks, but if you're looking at like true hiking, you're gonna wanna go north to Marin or hike on the coast or in like neighboring towns and cities. Cost of living, everybody's favorite topic when it comes to San Francisco. I also did a whole video on this of what I spent in a month in San Francisco, so if you want to see intimately like how much every single one of my meals cost, down to the penny, how much my grocery bill was, what I spent on bus fare, like that's all there for your viewing pleasure. But face value, you're looking at your lunches and your you know, quick meals being about 15 to 20 bucks. Drinks are easily 15 bucks at a bar. Bus fare is $2.50 just one way for one leg, so every time I go to my therapist's office and back, it would be $5. And then rent. At the time I was living in the city for a 1-bedroom in a 2 to 4 bedroom apartment, it would ring you up anywhere between $1,400 to $2,300. And I would say almost everyone I knew was spending somewhere within that range unless they had a studio, in which case that could be like $3K plus. Depending on the neighborhood, depending. I'm overusing that word, but I know I'm making a lot of generalizations in this video, so there are edge cases, there are other situations, but I would say generally you are spending a lot. SF is one of the most expensive cities in the US, if not the expensive city, depending on the year. Salaries tend to be a little bit higher to accommodate that, but I know folks that are earning 6 figures and, you know, not really living comfortably when they have debt to pay off and rent to cover and just have to pay for, you know, city life. So politics, politically, what does the SF landscape look like? I would say predominantly neoliberal. Transplants tend to be very moderate, a lot of centrists in that community, but there's also a huge activist community in SF, definitely leftists to be heard of. SF as a whole leans left of center. No one's moving there because they want to find a conservative community to fit in with. Like, SF has its reputation for a reason. Going out culture and nightlife, non-existent right now, but it is very bar heavy, not as much clubbing. And then a lot of like casual house parties, a lot of rooftop parties because SF is so vertically designed. A lot of times people will do stuff on their rooftops, which is really fun. There's like 3 main neighborhoods to go out in. The Marina, which is, like I said, very fratty. You have the Mission, which is a little bit more like edgy, alternative, like a little more grungy. And then you have Polk Street, which is kind of in between the two. It's fun, like very bar crawl friendly, not as much like dancing as some other cities I've gone out in, but like it's a fun time. It's like pretty good. All right, and then what would like my ideal weekend look like in San Francisco if I could paint the picture for you poisonally? Like wake up, walk from my apartment in Nob Hill to brunch, typically Kitchen Story, wait in line for 40 minutes, fuck around with my friends, eat some lemon ricotta pancakes. Then after that, shop around at some local stores, maybe buy some art, some plants, pick up some pastries at Tartine, and then head to Dolores Park to hang out, witness whatever wild behavior is going down at the park that day, then grab burritos at Pancho Villa for lunch. That's my favorite taqueria in the city. And then start walking back through the Haight, maybe do some thrifting, and then walk up to Fillmore, do some more shopping and bopping around there, maybe hit up a museum in Golden Gate Park instead, do ramen in Japantown for dinner, and then catch the sunset on my rooftop for free. If you're looking for a better picture of what SF life looks like, please subscribe. There's a ton more videos on my channel of Week in My Life vlogs from SF, little clips and snippets of what my average life there would look like. If you happen to be watching this because you live in SF and I missed anything huge, leave that in the comment section down below. I'm sure I did. It's impossible to cover a whole city in a 15 to 20 minute YouTube video. If you have any more questions about SF or any more videos you want me to film on SF related topics, let me know. I'm happy to add what I can from my specific perch. And thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. I will see you all next time, and Katherout. If you are watching this video to terrorize me in the comment section, welcome. I'm assuming you're an SF native, your opinions are super valid, and if you want to comment those down below, I'm sure they will leave a lasting impact on anybody watching this video, so I'm not scared of you. In all seriousness, every time I do a video centering on SF, it's just a very polarizing topic, so I tend to get a lot of hate comments, So trying to get in front of those. If you are feeling particularly resentful of all of the change in San Francisco, I'm going to link a few groups down below that are on the ground doing the work if you'd like to donate your time or your money to those organizations that are trying to create a more just and livable city.